Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins. They say the golden cliffs of Andestar still shine at sunset, though the empire that carved them into idols has been ash for an age. I would not know. I have not seen the sea in many years. But once, long ago, I watched the tide pull away from those shores like a curtain slowly drawn, revealing the bones of something too old to name. It is not the memory that haunts me. It is the silence beneath it. I was born in the hills of Emeria, where the grasses sing when the wind forgets its direction, and the stones remember more than they show. My grandmother kept her garden at the edge of a slope, no map names anymore, and each morning she'd bow to the east, not in worship, but in apology, for something lost, for something we had no right to keep. She told stories not with her voice but with her hands, wrinkled fingers brushing moss from the edges of a stone basin, whispering with the rhythm of cleaning, of tending, of waiting. I used to think she was mad, until I began to see the shadows gathering in the water. Not reflections, no. These were not shaped like anything living, just ripples where there should be stillness. It was from her that I first heard the name Ar-Pharazôn, though she never spoke it directly. She would say instead, the last pride, or the golden hush, or, when her breath grew shallow, the man who stood where no man should. Her eyes would drift then, to the western sky, to the direction of silence. There is a tree on the road from Emeria to Romana that no longer blooms. It is thick with bark that has folded in on itself, like old skin over an unseen wound. Travelers leave tokens there, not offerings, not prayers, just bits of memory they no longer wish to keep. A child's ribbon, a carved stone bird, a broken comb. They say it was once a waymarker along the King's Road, but the path no longer passes there, and no road lantern has been lit beyond that point in 300 years. Even the birds avoid it. The elders say the empire ended in fire, but fire is loud, and this ending was quiet, like dust closing over an empty tomb. I feel, that I once stood in the hall of the King's Guild, in Ar-Pharazôn the Golden, beneath ceilings so high they held clouds. Columns taller than watchtowers rose in a circle, and tapestries of thread of silver hung like falling rain. It was not beauty that made the air heavy. It was the weight of too much memory, pressed into stone and silk alike. There was a silence there that drank every sound, and in the center, where now nothing stands, there was once a throne, not for sitting. It was never sat upon. It was carved from a single block of night-black stone, veined with gold like veins of rot through bone. No one touched it, but still, it ruled. I was too young to understand, but not too young to feel. I remember my feet cold on the marble. I remember the light dimming though the sun had not yet set. I remember that everyone in that hall whispered, not from reverence, but because they feared the throne might hear them. Years passed, or perhaps none at all. I no longer trust time. One night, a man came to our village with sand in his boots and gold dust under his nails. He did not speak, but he carried something in a bundle of black sailcloth. He walked to the tree, the one that no longer blooms, and buried the bundle beneath its roots. No one stopped him. Some things are not to be questioned. In the weeks after, the cattle began to give birth early. The river swelled but did not flow. The sun set behind the wrong hills, I asked my grandmother what it meant. She only looked at me, her eyes as wide as when the sea wind blows down the mountain trails. Wild, trembling, full of knowing. "It is returning," she said, though her lips barely moved. "What is?" Her answer came not in words, but in the sound of a dry leaf falling onto stone. After she died, I found the basin half filled with black water. No rain had come. No one had poured it. Beneath the surface, faint as breath on glass, was the reflection of a crown. Not a full crown, mind you. Just the suggestion of gold, tarnished and bent, resting in the depths where no hand could reach. I have not spoken of it since. Until now. Because last night, the wind returned. Not the east wind, not the mountain wind. Number this was a sea wind, heavy with salt and grief, and songs no mouth should know. It came bearing the scent of forgotten stone and the echo of distant bells. And in that wind, I heard a voice, not loud, not even clear, just a murmur, like a king dreaming of his empire beneath a hill no map dares mark. They say Ar-Pharazôn was buried alive in a place that was never meant to open, that his pride built a tomb so vast it became a city, that he sleeps still beneath layered rings of gold and ruin, whispering promises through the cracks of time. But I do not believe he sleeps. Number, I believe he waits, not to return. That would be too simple. He waits to be forgotten, fully, completely, so he can become something else. And as long as someone remembers, even a whisper, he remains a shadow between the stones. The garden still blooms, but never where the sunlight falls, and the basin still fills, even when the sky is clear. Somewhere beneath the stone, the wind still sings, but only in languages no longer spoken. And tonight, I do not think I will dream. Not because I do not wish to, but because something else is dreaming for me, and its dreams are older than light. The rains have not returned to Calanthe. They say the valley was once a cradle for rivers, braided veins that dance between hill and hollow, feeding the orchards with the memory of first fruit. But now, the stones lie bare, like ribs beneath a thinning skin. Even the lichen has retreated inward, curling against itself like an old wound that remembers too much of winter. There is a sound that lives here, beneath the hush of windless trees. Not quite a song, not quite a silence either. Something in between. The villagers have long stopped speaking of it, not out of fear, but out of reverence, as one forgets the name of a relative long buried, yet still brings a bowl of water to the door each morning. The path into the valley is barely a path at all. It is more suggestion than trail, hinted at by the way the moss parts around your feet, or how the air thickens when you step too far left. I followed it once, many years ago, though the reason for doing so has long faded. All I recall now is the cold, not of temperature, but of presence. Cold, like an unasked question. At the heart of Calanthe, nestled between the bowed shoulders of two granite hills, rests a ruin. No spires remain, no doors, no archway or bell, just a single wall of black stone, cracked from root to crown, upon which the rain once carved something like script. I touched it, once, and for a moment, I could not remember my own name. The wall bears no history, only weight. Children are not born in Calanthe anymore. They say the land has grown tired of beginnings. Even the birds have turned their nests outward, away from the hollow. There are flowers that bloom here once every 7 years, pale things with petals like moth wings, trembling even when there is no breeze. No one touches them. They are called ash blossoms, not because of their color, but because they always grow from places where something has burned, though no fire has ever been seen. I once stayed in a stone hut near the edge of the hollow where the wind carries less sound. The roof had fallen in long ago, so I watched the stars from my bed of dry grass. One night, while the stars wheeled without motion, I heard something moving not in the air but under it, as though the ground was shifting in its sleep. Not tremor, not quake, breath. And with that breath came a memory not mine. A woman standing barefoot in a flooded orchard, her hair filled with leaves, whispering apologies to the drowned fruit. I do not know who she was, but she looked like someone I had once forgotten to remember. There is a well just beyond the ruin, shallow and wide, bricked with hand-shaped stones and covered by a lattice of thorn. No water lives in it, only a hush, heavy and round. Some say if you lower a candle into the well, it will not go out, but it will not reflect either. The flame simply floats, untouched by light or shadow. I did not try. I believe some things should be trusted at a distance. On my last morning in Calanthe, I rose before dawn, hoping to hear birdsong. There was none, only a single echo, the kind that follows a bell long after it has ceased to ring. I walked to the ruin again, though my steps felt borrowed. The ground seemed to lean away from my feet. The stones were damp, though no dew had fallen. The wall had changed, not in shape, but in feeling. It no longer seemed ancient. It felt new, as though it had just been placed there, still warm from the memory of hands. And though I know it is impossible, I swear the crack that once split it was sealed. Not mended, not healed, hidden. I placed my hand upon it once more. The stone was smooth, too smooth, like something recently washed clean of time. And behind my eyes, I saw a road of gold dust leading into a forest of white ash, where every tree bore a single, silent face, not carved, not grown, simply waiting. I stepped back, and I wept, not from fear, but from recognition. There are stories in Calanthe that have never been told, because they cannot be. They do not speak in words, nor show themselves in dreams. They live instead in the spaces between the stone and the moss, between the sound and the silence, between one breath and the next. And once they know your name, you begin to forget everything else. Even now, years later, when I sit by the window in my aging house far from the valley, I sometimes find my fingers tracing shapes in the condensation, circles within circles, lines that curve and fade, symbols I cannot read but feel I was once meant to carry. The rain avoids this house, always has, and the well in my garden never dries, no matter the drought. I do not draw from it. But some nights, when the wind dies completely and the moon hangs too still, I can hear something whispering just beneath the surface. Not to me, through me. And I remember the ash blossoms blooming from cold soil. And I wonder, gently, reverently, whether the empire ever ended at all, or if it simply began waiting, one breath at a time, in soil, in stone, in sorrow, listening. The hills beyond Elithorn carry no names now. Once, they were charted by silver ink on parchment, stretched thin as winter skin. Once, travelers marked their bends with cairns and river-smoothed stones, arranging them in quiet stacks that always seemed to fall by morning. But now, the land is only shape, a long sigh of earth draped in fog, curving away from memory like a forgotten hymn. I walked there once, when the skies were the color of cooled iron and the grass grew sideways, bowing not to wind, but to something older. Each step felt rehearsed, like following footsteps I had never seen. The soil was soft, but not from rain. It was the softness of ground that has not been spoken of for a very long time. There is a field just before the rise, wide and low, bordered by bone-colored reeds that sway even when the world holds still. They call it the listening vale, though no voice has passed through it in an age. No birds sing there, no beasts tread, only the wind, low and circular, gathering in the hollows like a breath held too long. In the center of that field stands a tree, or what once was. It leans eastward, stripped bare, though its bark glows faintly in dusk light, not from life, but from memory. Its roots are visible, knotted above ground like a hand reaching backward, grasping at the air. I touched one, softly, and the cold of it was not the cold of death, but of waiting. There were carvings on its base, faint, so faint, shapes half swallowed by Lichen. Spirals interrupted by time. Names, maybe, or warnings. I could not read them, but I did not need to. Some messages are written for the stone itself. Beneath the tree, the ground dips gently, a shallow bowl filled with dried petals, fallen from no living bloom. The petals are pale ochre and blue-grey, their edges curling in as if afraid. I stepped among them once, careful not to disturb their pattern, though I did not understand what it meant. Still, the air felt heavier afterward, as though I had walked into someone's last thought. My grandmother, the one who remembered how to forget, used to speak of places like this in her sleep, not in words, but in breaths that caught on certain names. Her mouth would shape them without sound, and I would sit beside her bed, watching the lines on her face deepen with each syllable she never uttered. One night, her hand twitched against the blanket, a single movement, then stillness. I looked where her fingers pointed and saw nothing, only the corner of the room where the plaster had begun to peel, revealing a layer of older stone beneath. I pressed my palm against it and felt warmth, not of heat, but of being remembered. Some walls are not meant to divide. Some walls remember what was buried in their shadow. When I returned to Elithorn, years after the field had become dream and the path no longer held my name, I brought no offerings, only a jar of salt and a folded scrap of velvet, the color of extinguished fire. I did not know why, only that my hands had packed them as if guided. The tree was there, still, but changed. Its bark now bore a single streak of silver, as though something within had begun to seep outward, slowly, carefully, like a truth preparing to speak. And though the petals were gone, the bowl at its base had filled again, this time with fragments of glass, each shard curved like a crescent moon, milky and dull, warm to the touch despite the frost. I held one, briefly, and saw not my reflection, but the outline of a place I had never been. A long hall of saltstone pillars and dripping roots lit by nothing, echoing with something softer than sound. I dropped it gently, and when I looked up, the tree seemed taller. The wind had begun to move in circles again, carrying with it a smell like burned time, dry, bitter, impossible. I sat beneath the roots until nightfall, not to learn, not to mourn, just to listen. And what I heard was not a voice, but a pattern, the rhythm of something remembering itself. It moved through the grass like a breath. It stirred the reeds, traced the bowl's rim, settled into the cracks of the stone beneath my knees. And as it passed, it left behind not knowledge, but weight, a solemnity. as if I had been present at a ceremony I could not name, as if the place itself had spoken, and I had become a witness. When I rose to leave, I took nothing, but one petal clung to my coat, though I had not seen any fall. It remains with me still, pressed between the pages of a book I do not open. Not out of fear, but because I am waiting. For what, I cannot say. Only that I now dream in circles, and sometimes, when the moon is quiet enough, I hear the reeds again, not calling, just continuing, like memory does, long after the names have been forgotten, like sorrow, dressed in moss and dust, still tracing the shape of a story no longer spoken, but never gone. The river no longer reaches the sea. It meanders through the lowlands now, slower than it once did, coiling in on itself like an old thought repeated too many times. Its waters have thinned, not vanished, but become something else, thicker than they should be, still and murmuring beneath a film of silver green, as if memory had begun to settle upon its surface like dust. No one draws from it, not out of fear, out of understanding. The banks are lined with reeds that do not sing. They lean, yellowed and brittle, toward the water like mourners too tired to weep. I stood there once, long ago, beneath a sky that seemed unsure of its color, not gray, not blue, the hue of forgotten parchment, the kind left in chests beneath root cellars, smelling of earth and secrets too patient to be buried. The air smelled of iron and wet bark. And further downstream, I saw it, the house with no windows. It rises from the reeds like a thought that cannot be erased, all angles softened by lichen, all corners blurred by age. No path leads to it, no bird's nest beneath its sagging eaves. It is as if it was built not to be entered, but to remain. Just remain. They say the house belonged to a woman who did not die, but folded inward, like cloth drawn around a quiet grief. She lived alone, or with something no one ever saw, or with no one at all. The stories change. The house does not. Its door is made of stone, not carved, not fitted, placed. A single slab resting against the entrance, as if it had been leaned there by a giant, too gentle to finish the task. When I stood before it, I did not knock. I did not wish to be answered. Instead, I circled the house, slowly, listening. The wood of its walls made no sound, but the shadows along the base of the structure rippled gently, as if some part of the foundation were breathing. In back, the house is hollowed, not collapsed, but opened. A room without a roof, where ivy has taken over every surface and rootlets dangle from what once may have been rafters. There's a well at the center, so shallow it barely seems a well at all, but around its rim, arranged with too much care to be forgotten, lay 12 stones, each inscribed with a single letter, the kind no language remembers. I reached to brush away a petal caught between two of the stones, but it crumbled before my fingers touched it, not from dryness, but from being seen. I sat by the well until dusk. The wind there does not move in gusts. It pulses, each wave softer than the last, like a lullaby hummed through soil. As night crept over the lowlands, the river began to glow, faintly, faintly. Not from light within, but from something beneath. Not gold, not silver, something quieter, like bones long forgotten beneath glass. I do not remember falling asleep, only waking and knowing that something had changed in me, not dramatically, not visibly, but like a thread had been unspooled, somewhere behind the ribs. When I returned home, I found the door ajar, not broken, just left, as if someone had entered and forgotten to finish. Inside, my house was untouched, and yet I knew, without needing proof, that I had been walked through. My books were closed but facing wrong. A chair slightly turned, a bowl moved half an inch, and upon my pillow, a reed, still wet. It smelled like the river, but also like something more, like pages turned in a storm, like skin warmed by vanished fire, like waiting. I kept the reed, not in water, not in cloth, just on the windowsill. It has not dried, not in all these years. Sometimes, when sleep comes slow and the world outside falls into its deeper hush, I hear the pulse of the lowland wind again, moving through the trees in uneven rhythm, like breath remembering itself. And I wonder, not about the house, or the woman, or the well, but about what remains when something vanishes quietly, what shape it leaves behind, what weight, what silence. I have not spoken of this to anyone, but I have begun folding my blankets differently, more carefully, as though preparing them for a guest I will never see. And some mornings, before waking, I dream of the 12 stones again. Not their letters, I still cannot read them, but their sound. Yes, I dream of sound carved into stone, software insistent, like the river forgetting its name. There is a bell that no longer rings. It hangs in the cloister of Gwelin Hollow, suspended between two half-fallen pillars, their stones softened by centuries of salt air and rain that tastes faintly of rust. The bell itself is cracked, not through violence, but through waiting. A thin seam runs from lip to crown, as though the sound within had tried once, long ago, to leave too loudly and broke the vessel that held it. The ivy has wrapped it in green silence, not hiding it, honoring it. I came to Gwelin not seeking anything, only wandering, only following the path where moss grew thickest beneath the feet. The village has no streets now, only impressions, shallow dips in the earth where feet once wore down patterns. Stone thresholds remain here and there, marking doorways to rooms no longer enclosed. Some houses lean toward one another, as if in mourning or prayer. Others stand apart, empty chimneys pointing skyward like fingers counting forgotten hours. There are no names left on the stones, only grooves shallow and strange, like markings etched in hesitation. I stayed in the chapel, though it has no roof. The floor is covered in pine needles and lichen, and in the apse there is a basin that still collects rain. Not much, just enough to glisten when the wind changes. Just enough to remind the shadows that water remembers. On the second night, the bell swayed. There was no wind, no tremor in the earth. But I woke, and it moved. A slow, almost imperceptible tilt back and forth, not enough to sound, only enough to be noticed. I did not rise. I simply watched. The stars behind it were steady, ancient, unmoved. But the bell moved, and in its arc I saw something I had not remembered I had forgotten. A child's shoe buried beneath dry leaves, a candle burning inside a sealed jar, a note pinned to a tree with no writing on it, only a circle drawn in ash. In Gwelin, even the birds fall silent. They fly over the hollow with heavy wings, dipping only their shadows across the ground below. The crows do not caw. The sparrows do not nest. Only a soft fluttering, as though memory itself moved through feathers. I spent the next morning among the ruins, not exploring, observing, and I found a staircase, not leading up or down, but inward, built into a hill of stone and root, each step sunken slightly more than the last. I did not descend, but I sat there, just above the moss-covered landing, and counted the breaths between the bell's sway. 7, then 9, then 7 again. The rhythm of something unfinished. The air in the hollow has a texture to it. Not damp, not dry, just full. As if every silence has gathered here, resting in the corners of crumbled walls and broken window frames, waiting not to be heard, but to be kept. That night, the sky grew darker than the hours allowed. I woke again, though I do not remember sleeping. The bell swayed once more, still no sound. But this time, something shimmered at its base. Not light, reflection. The kind seen on still water when a name is spoken aloud but not heard. Faint, flickering. The outline of someone kneeling, hands cupped, as though offering something that could not be taken. I did not approach. I closed my eyes, and in that darkness, behind the lids, I saw the hollow as it must have once been. Not bustling, no. It was never loud, but tended. Paths swept clear by slow hands. Lanterns lit not to chase the night, but to welcome it. Chimes made from glass and bone, hung where the wind could whisper through them without effort. And a single bell, whole, ringing once a year. Only once. Only when the sky forgot itself and opened wide enough to let the memory out. When I woke with the sun, the shimmer was gone. But beside the basin, in the chapel's ruin, a stone had been moved. It bore no carving, no marking, only warmth. Not the warmth of touch, the warmth of having been looked at. I left Gwelin Hollow the way I had come, slowly, uncertain whether my footsteps made any sound. The bell did not ring, but as I crossed the threshold of the last broken archway, the air shifted, just enough to make the reeds bow, just enough to send the pine needles swirling in patterns I could not read. And I knew I would return, not because I wanted to, because some silences do not let you go. They cling, like the scent of old wood, like the weight of unsent letters, like the final note of a lullaby no one ever learned, but still sings softly when the night grows too still. The marsh beyond Island Dune is not on any map. It appears only when the mist is heavy and the moon forgets to rise. A flat stretch of land where trees lean like listeners and the reeds grow tall enough to shroud the sky. Travelers speak of it in soft, uneasy tones, as though it is a place that should not be named after dark. But I have seen it. I have walked its perimeter and breathed its air, thick with the scent of wet bark and something older than rot. It does not welcome, it remembers. I found it by forgetting where I was going. There was no intention in my steps, only drift, the way dreams guide feet without asking permission. The earth turned to water beneath me, then to something in between. I did not sink. I simply stopped moving forward. The marsh does that. It gathers you. There is a tree at its center, not tallest nor dead, but still, unshifting, even in wind. Its bark is smooth, pale as bone, and lined with thin, dark grooves like writing erased by time. Beneath it, the water deepens, but only enough to reflect, never enough to drown. They say it was once a place of oaths, but now it holds only echoes, and the reeds that surround it bend without breeze, as though listening to things no longer spoken. I sat on a slab of black stone near the edge. It was warm despite the cold air, covered in patches of moss that shimmered faintly in the low light. Not bright, just enough to be noticed, just enough to feel seen. In that stillness, I heard something, not a sound, a pattern, the kind that lives in the rhythm of absence, a pause that repeats, like the breath of someone who is almost, but not quite, sleeping. Around me, the mist rose higher, It did not move quickly. It gathered like lace across the surface of water, curling inwards, folding upon itself. Within its folds, I glimpsed shapes, not formed, not whole, but familiar in the way certain memories are felt rather than known. A pale hand resting in moss, a circle of pebbles, each a different hue, a mirror with no reflection, tilted toward the sky. I looked away, but the images did not leave. They lodged themselves in the space behind the ribs, where breath slows and names are stored. By morning, the mist had lowered, though it never vanished. The sky above the marsh was blank, not clouded, but emptied. A pale dome without movement, without direction. I could not tell where the sun should be. Beneath the central tree, I saw that the water had cleared. Its surface was glass, and in it not my reflection, but a scene. A woman walking backward through snow, her footprints vanishing as she moved. A door suspended between two trees, not attached to anything. A lantern, lit but unheld, hovering just above the ground. I blinked. The water rippled. The image was gone. But the feeling remained of having witnessed a memory not my own. I stood, though the marsh had softened the muscles of my legs, and where I had sat, the moss was shaped to me, glowing slightly, as if holding warmth for longer than it should. I whispered an apology. For what, I did not know. But the reeds hushed, and the silence that followed felt sacred. I left no trail behind me. The ground closed gently where my feet had pressed. The fog drifted in again, not to hide, but to protect. As I passed beyond the marsh's edge, the air lightened, not in weight, but in memory, like a room long sealed, now open to sunlight. But even now, I carry its hush, in the way I pause before speaking, in the way I fold my hands at dusk, in the way my dreams end, always, at the edge of a still pool, beneath a pale tree, where I am watched not by eyes, but by time. And though I have not returned, I know the marsh remembers, because the moss that clings to my boots has never dried, and on nights when the world turns inward, when even the wind forgets its path, I feel a warmth beneath my ribs, as though I carry someone else's memory, quietly, for safekeeping. The stairs at Nereth's Hollow descend into nothing. They begin without threshold, shaped from a stone too soft to echo, spiraling slowly down into the earth like the forgotten remainder of an unfinished thought. Each step is uneven, worn more by waiting than by feet. No wall frames their descent, only silence and the gentle weeping of water that never gathers, falling in slow rhythms from above, drop by drop, as if the cave itself is remembering something it cannot hold. I found them while following birdsong that led nowhere, or rather, to a place that used to be one. There are no birds now, only the impression of their music, etched faintly into the air, as though even sound leaves ghost behind when it grows tired. At the top of the stairs sits a stone basin, empty, lined with salt. Its rim is ringed with pale handprints, some so small they feel like they belong to nothing human. The salt gathers even on dry days. It thickens, flakes, reshapes itself without touch, the slow language of the hollow, unreadable and patient. I rested there once before stepping downward, not far, only a few paces. The air changes, not colder, closer. It presses without weight, settles behind the ears, beneath the ribs. The light above remains, but seems to unlearn itself the deeper you go. Shadows do not fall here. They wait. Halfway down the spiral, a niche opens in the wall. Not carved, not formed, just present. Within it sits a chair. Wood, but of a kind no longer grown. Its arms are curled, its seat hollowed by absence. Upon its back hangs a cloth, frayed, colourless, and damp with something older than water. I did not sit, but I placed my hand upon the wood. And in that moment, I forgot what time it was. Not the hour, the concept. As though time itself had stepped aside to allow something older through. I turned back, carefully. The salt had climbed the sea stairs behind me. A thin dusting at first, then thicker, crusted along the edges, forming patterns like frost beneath a glass untouched by breath. In one place, the salt had formed a circle, unbroken, flawless, and within it, a single black feather lay, glistening faintly, though no light touched it. I did not take it, but I dream of it still. The hollow behind me pulsed once, not with sound, but with shape, as if the air had exhaled, and in doing so, reformed what lay within it. I did not descend again, but I lingered near the basin at the top of the stairs for hours. Sometimes I still feel the salt beneath my fingernails. In Nerith's hollow, nothing decays quickly. Wood softens, but does not collapse. Stone leans, but never falls. And cloth, forgotten for centuries, still drips. The moss here grows in perfect silence. It climbs in spirals, mirroring the stairs below. No insects touch it. No creatures rest upon it. It is the moss of memory, shaped not by seasons, but by sorrow. Above the hollow, the ground is soft, covered in petals fallen from trees that no longer bloom. They gather year after year, but never rot, only fade, slowly, gently, until they become as thin as breath. I gathered one once, long after I'd left, pressed it between the pages of a book whose title I've since forgotten. But the page remains warm, and when I open it, the room quiets. Not from fear, but from reverence. Some nights, I hear the stairs in my sleep, a soundless spiral, each step unfolding beneath my feet without touch, each turn leading not down but inward. I do not wake afraid, only stilled, as though a part of me has remained below, listening, not for sound, but for return. And when I close my eyes again, I see the basin at the top, half full with something clear, not water, not salt, and the reflection within it is not my own, but someone sitting in the chair, hands folded, waiting for a name that has not been spoken in many winters. Waiting, not to be remembered, but to be believed. It is said the field at Varith Ellen never dries, even when the sky forgets to weep, even when the air carries the silence of drought. The earth there remains damp beneath the soul, not wet, not muddy, only softened, as though it remembers footsteps long since vanished and cannot bear to grow hard again. There are no paths across it, no rows of stone, no boundaries drawn, but if you walk its breadth at twilight, you'll find your steps begin to curve on their own, gently, as if shaped by something deeper than intention. You'll find yourself moving in arcs, wide and slow, until the horizon folds and the grass changes color. The grass at the center is always a little darker, not black, not dead, just burdened. There is a circle there. No stones mark it, no runes or fences. Only the way the grass bends inward, as though pressed upon by memory alone. Nothing grows within its edges, nothing flies overhead. And in the stillness of dusk, if you stand at its rim and close your eyes, you may feel the echo of something very old. Not presence, but attention. I stepped into it once, not far, only the breadth of a breath, and the air thickened, the kind of thickness that rests beneath a lake's surface, a weight not made of fear, but of invitation, quiet, heavy, and without demand. I stood there, until the wind stopped, not paused, stopped, as though the world around me had leaned in to listen. The circle is surrounded by willow thorns, twisted trees that never flower, but always hold dew. Their branches arc downward, brushing the ground without moving. In their shadows, bones sometimes surface after rain, though never animal, never complete, always partial, delicate, folded in strange repose. No one takes them, no one speaks of them. Only the crows come near, not to caw, but to land in silence, their black forms held like punctuation against the pale canopy. Near the edge of the field, there is a bench carved into the hill, weathered smooth, split once through its spine. No one built it, I think. It simply exists, shaped by time and leaning. I sat there once beneath the weightless sky, my hands open and empty. In the distance, bells sounded, not of brass or silver, but of something deeper, a resonance that hummed through the bones of the earth and rose into the hollow of my chest, like breath remembered from a long-forgotten song. The bells came not from any tower, but from below. Their sound did not grow louder, only closer, not toward me, into me. And as they passed, I thought I saw movement in the circle, not of figures, not of shapes, but of time, of events unfolding in reverse, a veil being drawn backward, revealing not what had been, but what had been withheld. A hand brushing a forehead, a letter sealed with ash, a bowl of river stones overturned in stillness. I watched, and the wind returned, carrying the scent of pressed petals and old wood. Not sweet, not bitter, a smell that knew morning and did not flinch. When I stood again, my hands were no longer empty, though I had picked up nothing. The weight was of memory. I left the field without marking where I'd been. The grass rose behind me, unbothered. The wind began to hum again in long vowels, like a story retold not in words, but in rhythm. And as I walked the slope away from the willow thorns, I passed an old woman sitting by the roots, her head bowed. I did not see her arrive. She wore no shoes, and her hands were stained with soil. A ribbon of blue linen was tied around her wrist, the kind that frays only from weeping. She said nothing, but as I passed, she raised one finger, not in warning, but in remembrance, a single gesture, as if to say, "You've carried it before. I have not returned since, but the circle remains in me, not as image, but as rhythm. It comes in moments between words, between breaths, in pauses where no sound belongs. I feel it in the hollow of my spine when the dusk light fails to find the floor, and I taste it in the well water when the bucket comes up too smooth. Even now, when I press my hand to certain stones, they are warm. And I do not know if it is because something was once buried beneath them, or if they, too, remember the field and the shape of a name that was never spoken aloud, but folded into the earth like a letter no one dared to read. There is a house above the clouds that no one built. It stands on a ledge of quartz grey stone, too narrow for foundation, too worn for design, and yet it remains. Crooked, soft-spined, cloaked in a veil of moss and cloud dust. No roof crowns it, only beams stretched like ribs toward a sky that never clears. The wind does not pass here. It pools. The house has no door, only a curtain of woven reed, long discolored by years of breath and rain. It shifts, but never opens, as though something stands behind it, not hiding, not watching, simply existing in the way memory does, quietly, without condition. I came upon it at the edge of forgetting. There is no path to this place. One walks upward until upward stops. and the mist thickens into sleep. The trees below thin into silence. The birds become thoughts. And then, all at once, the stone appears, flat, cracked, warm beneath bare feet. The first thing I saw was the bowl, set beside the entrance, carved from something pale and bone-smooth. Within it sat 12 seeds, each the color of dusted ash, each the shape of something that no longer grows. They glistened faintly, though there was no sun, no flame. I did not touch them, but I knelt beside them, and the air thickened, as though I had leaned too close to a secret not meant for me. Inside, the house is neither open nor enclosed. Walls drift into corners but never meet. The floor is not level. There is a table made of stone and silence, a chair formed from what looks like driftwood but feels like it grew there. Everything here feels older than news. Above the hearth, though no fire burns there, hangs a mirror, round, black, untouched by light. And yet, as I stood before it, a shape emerged. Not mine, not quite. A silhouette of someone sitting in the chair I had only seen, their head bowed, their hands cupped as if holding water that wasn't there. I blinked. The image held. A slow breath moved through the room, though I could not tell whose it was. And beneath it, beneath even the stone, I heard the low murmur of something vast turning in its sleep. Not dangerous, not safe, just endless. A cloth hung over the far wall, thin, frayed, stitched in thread the color of smoke. There were markings upon it, but not in any script. They flowed like veins, like river lines or cracks in ancient porcelain. I traced one with my eyes and felt myself drifting. The line curved into a circle, then broke, then curled inward, becoming smaller, smaller, until it vanished into nothing. And in that moment, I felt something inside me mirror the shape, not pain, something quieter, like remembering the name of someone who has already forgotten yours. There is a corner of the house that does not hold space. You walk toward it and find yourself turning away, not by will, but by rhythm. It resists without denying. It folds without folding, as if it has decided not to be perceived anymore, and the air obeys. I sat on the floor near it, cross-legged, hands resting on knees, and I waited. For what, I do not know, but the silence became full, not with sound, but with meaning. There was a presence, not beside me, not near, through the beams, through the mirror, through the seeds in the bowl. Something old enough not to move. It filled the house like dusk, and in that dimness, I began to hum. Not a song, not a melody, only a note, low, steady, like the breath of wood, like the echo of tide in a conch once offered at the mouth of a forgotten well. And for a moment, the mirror breathed back, a flicker, a tremor, a soft widening, as if it had always known this note, as if it had been waiting for it. I rose before the sky could pale, not because it was time, because the stillness had begun to hum too deeply, and I feared I might forget how to leave. At the doorway, I turned once more. The seeds had changed. Only 11 now, one gone. The bowl was empty in the place it had been, but no trace remained. Not of motion, not of theft, only absence, the kind that marks what was once sacred. I did not speak, but the reed curtain trembled once, as if in response. I stepped into the mist. It folded around me with the softness of memory, and by the time the stone gave way to soil, the house was gone. No path led back, no bird song returned, only the faint sound of breath behind the trees, too slow to be wind, too steady to be mine. And in my pocket, without knowing how, a single seed, still warm, still listening. In the western quiet, where the earth leans toward the sea but never reaches it, there is a bell made of glass that cannot ring. It stands alone in a hollow of sand and stone, half buried, half exposed, as if the wind laid it there long ago and the land chose not to refuse it. The glass is smoked with time, fogged in places, and etched with veins that look like rivers drawn by a trembling hand. At dawn, it catches the light for only a moment, a single pulse. Then nothing. The bell does not move, it listens. Around it, the ground is littered with petals that do not match any bloom. Grey and thin, brittle as breath, they fall not from branches but from memory. Even in the stillness, they shift, slowly, as if turning over old names. The cliffs above it have no edges. They dissolve into air. The stone worn down into silence, leaving behind the impression of walls that once believed in permanence. Birds do not nest here. Their wings pass overhead without pause, casting flickering shadows that disappear before they fall. It was there that I slept without meaning to. The sky had stretched too wide, and the wind had stopped folding around me. I lay down beside the bell, not seeking rest, but forgetting to stand. The sand beneath me was cold, but not unkind, the kind of cold that knew how to carry weight. When I woke, I did not open my eyes. The world around me had stilled. Even the air held its breath, soft and unmoving, and in that hush, I heard it. Not the bell, but what the bell remembered, a voice, software cracked, unspoken, not words, but the shape of them, as though something had tried once to tell a truth and instead became the silence that followed it. I opened my eyes to a light that did not come from sky or sun. It rose from beneath. The sand was glowing in places, faintly, not with fire, but with memory. Small flecks of color scattered like stars at my feet, each fading the moment I focused on it, only to return when I looked away. And within the glass bell, a figure, not standing, not formed, just curled, asleep, or held in sleep. Their limbs were thin lines of smoke, their hair the color of salt caught in shadow. No face, only the impression of waiting, of once having known something so deeply it could not be let go. The figure did not move, but the bell shimmered, once, a slow, aching tremble, like a sigh that had taken centuries to reach the surface. I placed my hand upon the glass. It was neither warm nor cold. It simply was. A surface, yes, but also a veil. And I knew, without needing to be told, that this was not a prison, not a tomb, not a shrine. It was a memory so powerful it had become a place. The wind returned, but not to disturb. It circled the hollow as if walking a perimeter, as if keeping the silence intact. Above, the clouds had formed a ring, wide and dim, like the eye of a storm that had forgotten how to spin. And in the distance, across the low ridge where no path had led me in, a line of stones had begun to surface, not arranged, emerged, each one rounded, smoothed by thought, not tied, each one bearing a single line, faint, carved too shallow to last, yet still visible. I traced one with my eyes and felt the sound of it rise inside me. Not language, not symbol, a tone, low, slow. A note meant not to be sung, but to be remembered. I walked among them, 23 in all. At the center of the spiral they formed, the sand was dry, perfectly dry, though no sun had touched it. Beneath it, shallow and still, was a pool no wider than a hand. Within it, a feather, silver white, curved slightly, floating as if held by breath. And below the feather, a second reflection, not mine, but familiar, the figure from the bell, eyes now open, watching from within. They did not move, but the water shifted, and in its ripples, I saw things that have no name. A child born beneath a ceiling of roots, a hand writing a letter that dissolves as it's formed, a candle lit in a room that no one remembers building. Each ripple faded into the next. Each memory folded itself back into the silence. When I turned to leave, the bell had vanished. The petals were gone. The light was ordinary, but the stones remained. I walked the path they made, though it led nowhere I knew. With each step, the sound of the bell, never rung, never real, echoed quietly beneath my ribs. Not mournful, not afraid, just there. A note too sacred to play aloud, but one that lingers forever in the space between the hand and the glass. There is a bridge that leads nowhere. It rises from a field of heather and salt, its stones sunken in places, worn to the shape of footsteps too old to trace. The arches beneath it are filled not with water, but with fog, thick and soundless, curled like breath drawn too deep and never let go. No one built the bridge, or if they did, they built it for forgetting. At its center stands a post, smooth, weathered, wrapped in faded ribbons that do not flutter in the wind. Each is tied in silence. Small knots with no messages, no names, no prayers, just presence. I walked the length of it once, barefoot. The stones were warm with dusk, and each step brought with it the weight of someone else's sorrow. Not heavy, not sharp, just steady. The way a name settles in the chest when spoken aloud after years of being unsaid. Beneath the arches, the fog never moves. It reflects no sky. No sound rises from it, not even the echo of steps overhead. Yet as I stood there, the edge of it shimmered, not with light, but with memory. A lantern swinging without chain. A chair turned slightly away from a window that no longer opened. A hand brushing dust from the corner of a child's drawing. These were not visions. They were truths that did not ask to be known. Beyond the bridge, the field resumes, but changed. The grass grows in spiral patterns now, as if remembering something circular, not crop, not design, just rhythm. I followed the spirals without thinking. In the center stood a tree, if it could be called that. It was hollow, yet unbroken. A shell of bark split into long fingers, reaching skyward like someone waking from a very old sleep. No leaves, no shade, but carved into its surface, delicately, precisely, were hundreds of concentric circles, some large, some small, none perfect. They were not drawn to impress. They were drawn to remember. I pressed my hand to one and felt heat, not warmth, heat, the kind that lives in stone long after the sun has gone. And beneath that heat, a pulse, slow, rhythmic, not mine. It did not ask for recognition. It simply continued. As I withdrew my hand, something fell. A single leaf, colorless and fine as lace, drifted from the hollow tree's crown. It landed at my feet and folded itself. Not torn, not creased, folded, as if by invisible hands performing a ritual no longer spoken of. I left it untouched. Some offerings are not for the living. From the tree's roots, a trail of stones led downward, into a dip in the land where mist sat low, tinged with the faintest green, as if spring were buried just beneath the surface and could not rise. I followed them. At the base of the dip, there was a pool, still, round, lined with a thin crust of something crystalline, not salt, not frost, something softer. It smelled of rain on burnt wood. Suspended above the water by 3 branches, tied in a triangle, was a cord, and from it, hanging low, was a mask, white, cracked, mouth closed, eyes hollowed. It turned, slowly, though there was no wind. Each movement precise, as if listening. I did not touch it, but the air around it changed. My breath slowed, my thoughts stilled, and from the pool a whisper rose. Not words, just the feeling of a sentence unfinished. A pause so deep it echoed. I sat beside the pool until the light vanished. Not sunset, just absence. The kind of dark that arrives from beneath, not above. Software unhurried. And in that darkness, I remembered something that had never happened. A name whispered into the hollow of a tree. A bell carried in a river. A seed that glowed when held in silence. None of these were mine, yet all felt familiar. I stood, the mask still turned, the pool still waited, the circles still carved. But I had nothing more to give, only the echo of what had passed through me. And when I stepped from the mist, the bridge was gone, but the ribbons had tied themselves around my wrists. Not tight, not loose, just enough to be remembered. And when I sleep now, I dream of knots untying, one by one, until the fog beneath the arches begins to breathe. The wind no longer moves in straight lines. It circles now, slow and deliberate, brushing over the old hollows, through the hollowed trees, along the places where once thoughts dwelled. Each spiral of air carries the weight of something unspoken, like the final note of a lullaby sung beneath a ruined roof. And somewhere beneath that wind, where root meets ruin, the earth remembers everything. I returned by forgetting, not the way, but the shape of leaving. I stepped where the moss held its breath. I paused where the reeds had bowed for centuries. The path did not emerge. It remembered itself beneath my steps. The first to greet me was the silence, not empty, not absent, but filled with breath that had waited too long, with the echo of bells that never rang, with petals that fell before blooming. There was no destination, only return. Each place I had wandered, each stillness I had held, they met again in me, not as visions, not as memories, but as truth returning to its shape. The spiral grass of Varith Ellen. It grew here too, beneath the slope of the final hill, curling inward in silent procession, like a clock unwinding backward into its own breath. I followed it, not with purpose, with listening. And at the center, there was no monument, only a mirror, laid flat in the earth, ringed with reeds that pulsed with the rhythm of slow tides. Its surface was not reflective. It absorbed. It accepted whatever the sky offered and turned it into forgetting. But when I looked, not into it, but with it, the shape revealed itself. Not a face, not a name, a pattern. The seed I had carried, it trembled. I opened my palm and saw it had cracked, not broken, unfolded. From within, a filament of silver thread reached outward, winding gently in the air, seeking, not blindly, not in need, in memory. It traced the line of my wrist, then the space where the ribbons had tied. Then upward, toward the stone basin that now rose from the grass, though I had not seen it before. I approached. It was the same basin from the stairs of Nareth's Hollow, but changed, worn not by weather, but by hands that had come seeking silence, not blessing. Inside it, salt, the same soft crust that had gathered across every threshold, and placed atop it, carefully, the mask, still white, still cracked, but now turned upward, its hollow eyes filling slowly with rain that had not yet fallen. I knelt, and beneath the mask, beneath the basin, beneath the soil I dared not move, was the sound, low, steady, The tone from the glass bell, the pulse from the hollow tree, the breath behind the mirror, all of them here, returning, or perhaps having never left. And with that sound came the knowing. The bridges I had crossed, the chairs I had not sat in, the wells I had not drawn from. They had not been warnings. They had been preparations. Each place held the imprint of what had been forgotten deliberately, not to escape it, but to preserve it. This was not the ruin of a world. This was the burial of a truth too sacred to survive spoken language, too vast to be trusted to stone. A truth that once lived inside a single breath and so was split, scattered among moss and mist and mirrors, so it could never again be whole, so it would never again be used. But the pieces remember, each knot tied, each ribbon frayed, each echo placed in a stair or a bell or a seed. They do not want to be found, they want to remain. And I, without knowing, had become a vessel, not a bearer, a place. Something had found shelter in me, and now it stirred. I touched the cracked mask with both hands. The salt beneath it dissolved. The mirror across the grass grew dark, and the air thickened, not with dread, with completion. Above me, the sky closed its eyes, and in the hush that followed, the truth returned. There was once a voice, not human, not bound, that sang the world into movement, not with power, with grief. It sang not to create, but to remember. And as the world answered, rivers, wind, stone, blood, it fell silent. Its final breath was caught in the throat of the land, held there, waiting. Each circle I had walked, each reflection I had witnessed, each silence I had passed through. They were not paths, they were ribs. This place, this story, this sleep was the body of that final breath, and I had walked through its lungs. Now I knelt at its mouth. The mirror shimmered, the basin emptied, the seed turned to ash in my hand, and I wept, not from sorrow, from recognition. For the first time, I felt the full weight of all that had been given. The patience of stone, the gentleness of moss, the long watch of hollow trees. They had borne this memory without complaint. They had carried it, the wound that had no shape, the song that could not be sung. They had whispered it through petals, echoed it in well water, woven it into the curve of stairs. And now that I had heard it, truly heard it, there was no sound left to speak, only the quiet, only the shape, and it folded itself inside me, slowly, without force, as a final name might fold itself into a tomb no hand would ever open. The ribbons untied from my wrists. They drifted toward the mirror, and as they touched its surface, the reflection returned. But it was not me. It was the figure from the glass bell, from the dream pool, from the mask. They bowed once, a gesture of equal sorrow, and disappeared. The sky exhaled, the wind resumed, the moss moved like breath beneath my feet, and I stood, changed, but not awakened, just returned. Somewhere far below, beneath soil and salt, beneath stair and circle and root, a voice began again. Not loud, not even heard, only felt, in the way water fills an old cup, in the way grief fills a name when no one is left to speak it. And I, too, became silence, the kind that holds, the kind that keeps, the kind that prays, even when no one listens. Especially then. I write this now, not as a record, but as a final act of listening. There are no pages left in the book I began years ago, though I do not remember when or where I first opened it, only that it has followed me, in dreams, in breath, in the weight behind my footsteps. Some books are not written, they are remembered into being, and this one has no title, not because it lacks meaning, but because its meaning is too old to be named. The places I pass through, they are not lost, nor are they hidden. They are here still, beneath the roots, beneath the sleep of stones, beneath the folds of things we choose not to carry but never truly lay down. I have returned to none of them, and yet they have all returned to me. At times, I see them in the folds of curtains when dusklight moves across the floor. At times, I hear them in the chime of cutlery when no one is speaking. At times, I feel them behind mirrors, behind trees, behind the surface of water that reflects nothing I remember being. I know now that I was never meant to complete anything, only to witness the incompleteness of the world, its songs without endings, its names half swallowed by earth, its altars that remember prayers long after the mouths that shaped them are dust. There is a sacredness in not knowing, and something more sacred still in knowing that you once knew. A shape I cannot draw lingers behind my ribs. I see it sometimes in the way leaves arrange themselves beneath a window, or in the way ash settles after the final coal has gone dim. It is not a symbol. It is not a prophecy. It is what remains when memory is stripped of story. Last night, in the hour between sleeping and staying awake too long, I dreamt of a staircase, not the one I had walked before, not stone, not moss-covered, not descending. This one was made of woven light and wet paper, rising through mist in impossible silence. I began to climb, not with my feet, but with something older, something in me that knew how to ascend without motion. At the top, there was no threshold, no arrival, only a field of listening. I stood in it for what felt like years, and in that field the wind did not blow. It hummed, low and constant, as if tuned to the bones of the earth or to the absence of someone too long gone. I waited, though I did not know for what, but in time, soft, imperceptible, the ground beneath me opened like an eye, and I looked down into a mirror that showed nothing, but I felt what it meant. Everything I had seen, the circle of reeds, the bell of glass, the basin of salt, the ribbons tied and untied, each had been a word in a sentence never meant to be spoken, a sentence older than sound. And now, at last, I understood that I was not reading the sentence. I was part of its grammar. I was the pause, the breath before the note, the silence that stitches meanings together. In the waking world, I find myself forgetting names, not of people, but of places. The well near the marsh no longer appears on any map. The house on the ledge has disappeared beneath cloud. Even the willow thorns have stopped dropping petals. I do not search for them, because what has been carried within no longer waits without. Sometimes, in the late hours, I open the drawer where I once kept the seed. It is empty, but the space it held glows faintly, not with light, but with something remembered into form, a warmth shaped like presence. The mirror in my hallway no longer shows my face at night. It reflects trees, hollow ones, with veins like silver threads stretching skyward, splitting, curling back into earth, and behind them, always behind them, a figure, not waiting, not watching, simply being. They do not come closer. They do not fade. They remain. And I understand now what I never did then. Some truths are not passed down like stories. They bloom inside us slowly, over years, over generations, until someone, without meaning to, becomes the soil where they finally take root. I was that soil. perhaps you are too. I have not spoken aloud in many days. It is not loneliness, it is reverence. Words feel brittle now. They crack too easily under what I know, and silence, once unbearable, is now the only thing wide enough to hold what I carry. I live near water now, not a river, not a lake, just a basin carved into stone where rain collects. I sit beside it each morning and wait. For what, I still cannot say. But I know now that waiting is not inaction. It is listening with the whole body. It is opening every part of yourself to receive what has no name. It is preparing for a sound too old for ears. One day, perhaps the basin will reflect something other than the sky. A hand, a ribbon, a mask. Perhaps it already has, and I simply looked away too soon. I'm not afraid, because fear cannot live in the same house as knowing. And I know now that none of this began with me. None of it ends with me either. We are all folded into the same cloth, all part of the same note, all echoes returning to the breath that first shaped them. There is a single word carved into the door of my home. I do not remember writing it, but it is there, and it changes every time I look. Once it was a circle, then a feather, then a spiral made of water. Last night, it was simply this: remember softly. That is all I can offer you now. Not answers, not light, only the slow grace of remembrance, not to fix, not to finish, but to hold and to keep, like the moss does, like the stairs do, like the breath that still hums through a bell that has never rung. Somewhere the mirror is still reflecting. Somewhere the seeds are still waiting. Somewhere the silence is still singing. And somewhere, far beneath all things, the voice is still speaking. Not in words, not in sound, but in shape, in folding, in the rhythm of everything returning to what it once almost knew but never said aloud. And in the space where that saying would have been, we dream, and the dream at last has roots.